what makes a surf culture. There's differences in each type of area that really depend on the waves and the surfers and the boards that they ride.
Santa Barbara really is an important link.
If you want to look at the accomplishments of people before us and who we're working off of, in Santa Barbara, you're working off of Yater.
He's one of those original guys. He's one of the original dozen guys that stepped off to do that and created the surfboard industry. And then you see this guy on a little red kneeboard carve an arc, throwing spray back into the tube, then in the tube, it's like a spaceman had landed. It's that revolutionary. It's just like, whoa, what am I seeing?
For the first time we saw vertical surfing, I just went, I've got to do that standing up.
That's when the light kind of goes on about this Greenough guy. It's got something.
He was a hell of an influence on me. I'd never really thought about surfing and turning back inside the barrel.
People were experimenting and the creative bubble was just simmering, and surfing was part of that.
Of course, that's the way I developed the whole mystique of Channel Islands, was on better surfers, high performance boards.
The goodwill from this little town is spread all over the world. I mean, I think of Rennie, I think of George, I think of Elmeric, craftsmen, people with a deep love for surfing, people that have taken surfing on a different path.
It's fine to take surfing seriously. The only wrong way to surf is if you think you're surfing the right way.
We weren't in there with furrowed brows creating these scientific formulas. We were having fun and we were just trying to make it more fun.
I didn't think that we really realized the magnitude of the whole thing.
I don't see any slowing in the surf world. All I see is just like infinite potential right now.
Spoons, A Santa Barbara Story, is the debut film of Southern California filmmaker Wyatt Daily. The film explores the history of California through the lens of a surfboard design, the Spoon, how the design was built for the flawless winter walls of Rincon, the various people involved with surfing and then refining those designs, and how they're all related to the boards that we ride today. This all started as a small and humble project, but the end result reveals never-before-seen footage of everyone from Bob Simmons to Pat Curren to Phil Edwards, George Greenough, Al Merrick, and Tom Curren. Wyatt was able to get interviews with Bruce Brown, Tom Curren, Al Merrick, and of course the central figure to the design and really the mainstay through these last 6 decades, Rennie Yater. The film won Best Documentary Feature at the Florida Surf Film Festival in November 2019, which is where I first met Wyatt and the film's producer, Justin Mish. I'm actually on the jury for the film festival, so I'd watched the film prior, absolutely loved it, and was really kind of looking forward to meeting Wyatt and Justin. So we enjoyed the weekend together, and then we were able to connect over Zoom recently during quarantine to discuss Wyatt's backstory and how he was able to pull all of this off. So without further ado, my name is David Scales for Surf Splendor, and here is my conversation with filmmaker Wyatt Daily and the story of Spoons. Enjoy. Congratulations on an amazing film. And I'm not saying that strictly because you're here. It is honestly the most professional, maybe, surf documentary that I've seen in some time, and the most successful as a documentary. So congrats.
Wow, that's huge. That's a huge compliment. Thank you so much.
Are there any reference points that you're using from a surf documentary world?
Well, I think Bruce Brown is always a guiding light. So, not necessarily Endless Summer, but On Any Sunday, to me, was really a masterful documentary that had a huge impact on how I kind of thought we could structure this film. That film in particular was great because he talks about so many different subjects, and he's got different individual characters, and they kind of go through this whole world that is like motorcycle racing, from flat track to just weekend riders or, enduro or whatever. And I thought that was, if Bruce could do it, then, it wouldn't be a bad idea to kind of follow in those steps.
I think that's a great reference. What's your background in terms of education? Did you go to film school?
I went to UC Santa Barbara, and they have a film school there, but it's mostly a theory program. There's very few production resources, but I studied film and also English. I got a dual major there.
Okay. And what about, what's your film background? How many films have you made, and what's the catalog look like?
Okay. So, there's been some student films, none that are worth mentioning. This is my first real film attempt. This is my first feature film. And yeah, it was many years in the making.
Well, yeah. When did you start it? First of all, let's back up. What was the original concept for the film?
So I can answer both those questions. It started back when I was still in school. I was a senior at UC Santa Barbara, and my roommate, his name's Grayson Nance, and his dad owns the Beach House, which is the classic surf shop in Santa Barbara. So he came to me with an archive, and this is how the project started. It was an archive for the Rincon Classic, which is a locals only surf contest. And he asked if I could digitize it. And I thought, all right, I can figure this out. I haven't done it before, but I got this box full of videotapes, slide film, like still photographs, and like old heat sheets from 1983 through 1996. Or no, sorry, 79 through 96. And as I dove into that archive, I kind of started my education. And the project originally began as a little documentary I had in mind about the Rincon Classic as a locals only surf contest, and as kind of like a cross section of all of this history in Santa Barbara. But it just kind of ballooned.
What was in the visuals in that box that he gave you? How much of the footage that's in the film came from that?
I mean, I spent like over a year getting this stuff digitized. We have, I think, 8 seconds that ended up being used from all of this archive. It was mostly the videos was like literally public access television for the contest that people had taped from their VHS. And the classic, you get you have the commercial breaks with the local surf shop or the local beer sponsor. But yeah, we ended up using like 6 seconds from Tom Curren in 1983 talking to Michael Thompson, who's Sean Thompson's cousin. And Michael Thompson is interviewing him on the beach at Rincon. And Tom is explaining that, in Santa Barbara, you got a lot of great surfers, but no one really on an international level. And when I saw that, it was like, I mean, it was, it's kind of, you spend these many hours and you find a little gem like that. And it's like, no one's ever seen this before, or at least they haven't seen it since 1983. And, that set the trajectory.
And Michael Thompson wearing a Gotcha shirt too, which was the inception of that company.
Oh yeah.
So it's funny. I moved recently and purged a bunch of printed photographs. And then also I have tons of surf magazines that I've been meaning to purge, but I just can't stand to do it. And watching your film made me regret purging all my photographs. And it made me want to keep all the surf mags, because these things that feel so like I haven't looked at them in years and they have no value to anybody. They're super cumbersome. And yet 20 and 30 years down the road, they're invaluable. Like you said, that 8 minutes is worth its weight in gold,
Oh, absolutely. And it's so much about these things like surf magazines or posters or even concert tickets or whatever. Like, it's the ephemera that's around it. So you can dig into a subject, but you get a context from what's happening when you look at this old text. And that's the kind of stuff that you can't really get when you get a excerpt from a Surfer's Journal article online, which is great. But when you can ask a friend who happens to have all of the surfing magazines, I'm talking to you, KP, and he can pull something out and go, oh, here's Rennie Yater on the first cover, or I think it was the second cover of Surfer magazine. Oh no, he's on the first cover of Surfer magazine. And then, here he is. He had his second cover. This was taken from his front porch at Rincon, and you can look through it and you can see what Surfer was back then. How it was just, Severson was putting together really basic outlines of like just pasting this stuff up, and guys are making their own ads, and that's the kind of stuff that you can't really explain unless you get to feel it and touch it and hold it. And that's really what I was hoping to kind of convey when you watch the film.
Back to the concept of the film. For listeners who haven't seen it, it's called Spoons, obviously, a Santa Barbara story. And it's actually, there's no way to do a comprehensive history documentary about Santa Barbara because it's so complex, and it would be a 30-hour documentary. But it is a very successful Santa Barbara story. And it's a really great little cross-section of the highlight moments. And the Spoons title is, it's told through kind of the lens of surfboard design, starting with Greenough and Yater, all the way through to Al Merrick and all that sort of stuff. So that's a very different concept than what started as the Rincon Classic. So kind of give me an understanding of your background, knowing surfing, going into this project, and what was the concept from that point?
Yeah, to try to handle a few of those points. We're super psyched that it's finally released. It's on iTunes, Vimeo, Google Play, and YouTube. We just dropped it in February, so we're super psyched about that. And it was a process for sure to get. Let's see my background with it. Well, it was an education for me, like to. It was my personal education, honestly. When we made the title Santa Barbara story, I was really, in fact, I really thought it was important that we called it a Santa Barbara story, because it's not the Santa Barbara story, and like you said, there's 30 that you can make you could do Ken Burns documentary on this thing, have it be 10-part series, and people would still say you missed some things. I kind of knew that going into it. But that being said, it's like there were some tough decisions to make as we were coming through, because as a research project, there's this tendency to want to include it all and to be comprehensive. But I felt like by just being a Santa Barbara story, it kind of takes the weight out of it and says, look, it's just a story, right? And as such, that allowed me to kind of freely explore it as a research project. And Santa Barbara is a very insular culture, and I definitely recognize the importance and the weight of it, especially the more I waded into it. But it was really the friends of mine that were encouraging me to continue to learn about this subject and to continue to explore it that made me feel like, just let's follow this to see where it goes. So that was that's a long way of saying Roger Nance and his son Grayson Nance is one of my best friends, and then Kim Robinson, who's one of Roger's closest friends. And the more I just would hang out with them, and they would kind of guide me in the right direction and say, why don't you talk to this guy? Have you thought about this? And this is why it was a multiple year process. I mean, from 2012, it went from shooting the Rincon Classic every winter to, eventually moving back into Santa Barbara in 2017 and giving it everything I had to try and get it finished. So what I'm trying to say is I'm setting the stage for, I as a surfer, I grew up between two completely different areas. And so this project was a way for me to learn. I was born in Newport Beach, and my mother and father were divorced when I was really young. So I was moved into Danville in Northern California in the East Bay, which is just a landlocked suburb. And really, nobody would know anything about it except for Jeff Johnson also lived there, who he went to go be in 180 Degrees South. Anyway, Danville and Newport Beach, completely opposite. And when I'd split my time, I always kind of, I learned to surf really young, but I always looked forward all year long to summer and to those holidays when I could go down and be with my dad and be at the beach and body surf at Wedge and, go surf Point or 56th Street or wherever we wanted to go. And I kind of thought that was it. Like as a kid, no one was teaching me anything else. I thought that was what surfing was. So when I went to Santa Barbara for school, that's when I realized there's a whole other world out there. And I felt like I discovered it for myself. And when I began to learn more about the rich history that came from Santa Barbara, I was stunned that this information wasn't commonly out there. Of course, in town, everybody knows it. And it's sacred. But outside of that insular world, I felt that people would really benefit from understanding the rich heritage and culture that came from Santa Barbara and how that influenced the world. So that was kind of my driving impetus.
It was successful because honestly, it was an education for me. I've grown up kind of around surfing and I've worked in surfing for a long time now. And so I knew a lot of this information, but you created, a framework and a context and put it all together very concisely that it filled in a lot of gaps of my understanding. And I'll give you a couple of examples, illustrating kind of the bigger cultural context that was happening in the world that coincided with the surfboard revolution, right? So it's not just that boards are coming down in size. It's that there's also this hippie movement that predisposes the culture to even accept change. That was something that I just hadn't dawned on me before, even though I was well aware of those things happening simultaneously. I never thought that greater cultural thing would have actually been part of the influence on board design. And the other one that comes to mind is about Al Merrick kind of being a flashpoint for when a surfer shaper devoted his work towards ushering in the youth. Because certainly there were surfer and shapers who had businesses and they were selling boards sometimes to youth, but Al Merrick really geared it towards fostering a team of children. So the movie was really successful in, again, creating kind of a larger context for me to put in some of just the information that I already had in my brain,
I mean, that's the part that was so exciting for me to kind of discover, because we kept talking to these, legendary figures, Rennie Yater, Mark Andrini. Mark Andrini was a huge aspect of the creating of the film. He really helped kind of guide it in many, many ways. And it was incredible to me that we could talk about something that there's been many generations of surfers, but the revolution really did happen in a year or two. I mean, it was a matter of years, but you're talking about a season in one area. And then how did these ideas just explode? And so you said it, it was this broader cultural conversation with, call it the hippie movement or the revolutionary movements that were kind of going on in the mid 60s. But I think from what I could kind of gather was nobody was really there was a lot of free thinking just in general. And people were excited, and everybody was kind of riffing off each other in this like grand scheme of like some, jazz music or whatever. And it's like you think about these guys were innovating as they were traveling, and there wasn't like Wayne Lynch says it. We weren't in there with furrowed brows creating these scientific formulas. We were just having fun, and we were looking for ways to make it more fun. And it's funny to think about, these pivotal moments in surfing that really came out of guys just staying on their friends' couches, right? Like, I'm going to come and go on a surf trip to Santa Barbara and stay on my friend's couch. And in the meantime, he's asking me, what are you making in Australia? What's this fin you've got going on? And they just share ideas that way. And And that to me was really cool because it really speaks to the community that surfing is. And then you also said something about Al Merrick and his and how his influence was really on making boards for young people, and that was something that of course is really, really important. And naming the film Spoons and thinking, well, how are we going to go from Yater and Greenough and then pull in Al Merrick? I mean, we're, nearly halfway through the film by the time we start talking about it after the shortboard revolution. But we're really talking about with Yater, measured, refined progress over time. And then with Greenough, this radical innovation. And what Merrick brought to it was this mentorship. That to me, the mentorship aspect really embodies what makes Santa Barbara area so special. Is this willingness to share with the next generation in a way that is not overstated or overdone, but just say here's how to compose yourself, and here's how to live your life in a good way. And I think from what everybody was talking about, that's what Al really did, was he provided a place for young people to come together with his barbecues and his spaghetti dinners and create this community of youth that helped a lot of young people, but then also in turn just built this business that, he saw that was a huge opportunity in the market. And of course that worked out really well. So
it's fascinating. That detail, Santa Barbara still feels that way. It's like a small town feel where the village raises the kid, It's not just in surfing. Santa Barbara feels that way at large. Two things that I was continually kind of stunned by in the film was, number one, your access to these people. And number two, your footage that you got. It says right at the beginning of the film that much of what you're about to watch has never been seen until now. Where did you get all of this footage?
So it was a long process, and it was funny because really the film started, as I mentioned, it started as an archival project, and that was from the very beginning. And so it would be essentially like you're trying to create something out of nothing. And the access comes from, like I said, talking with Roger, talking with Kim. And I had an early interview with Rennie Yater in 2013. And this is so early in the film, or in the process, that I only asked him questions about the Rincon Classic and like shaping boards. And he said something about working with George Greenough. And I thought, okay, that's cool. But I didn't really know who George Greenough was at the time, or at least it wasn't the film I thought I was making. I revisited the footage and I said, oh my God, like that's the story. And so from 2013 on, I didn't have another interview with Rennie until 2018. We were almost about ready to premiere, but I had spoken to him. I was friendly with him on the phone. He's a kind of a standoffish kind of guy, not in a mean way. It's just that he stays to himself. And, but he was always really kind to me whenever I asked him questions. And so having Rennie as somebody who I could look to for guidance, and who I knew would, had at least lent his time to an interview. I talked to people and I said, I'm making this film. It features Rennie Yater. Do you have anything you'd like to say about it? And people would, realize that I was looking to make a film that wasn't about them. And that was the key. The access part was anyone who I was trying to speak to have in the film. I never asked them if I could have their time to talk about them. And if they were willing to share stories about other people, then they were happy to do it. And it went around like that. Similarly with the archive, it's like you get this I got this box, cut a little trailer, showed it to a couple people. They said, you should talk to this guy. He had a camera. Oh, why don't you, reach out to this guy named Glenn Clark in Solvang. He had a camera, and here's this. Go up to see Glenn Clark, and he's got 13 hours of Super 8 footage that he took from 1969 through 1973 up at the ranch and at Santa Barbara, and he was just he did it. It was his own camera. It was his own thing, but he did it with intention. He was very deliberate with how he made his films. He ended up going off to Vietnam and lived a, really interesting life. But it was his warmth and kindness that said, hey, no one's ever said anything to me about this. This is his life's work. It's essentially his childhood. He was like, it was like 18 through 22, 23. And so we got the archive, and as soon as we had archive, we would ask other people, hey, we're going to do a run of digitization. Do you have anything you want to bring in? Cause it's cheaper by the bulk. And then it would be Don Balch in San Diego. And Don Balch would say, oh, I've got some great stuff. And Don shot for Surfer, and he had a little bit more of a professional career in shooting. And so then Don Balch has another category of people. Hey, have you talked to this person? And then it kind of grew until somehow we had this. I mean, I know we could go into the long story of it, but we were eventually sitting in front of Bruce Brown. And Bruce Brown was super open and just so kind and willing to share with us. And he gave us some footage. And so now we could cut something else that was new and show it to people. And they'd say, oh, that's really neat. And if Bruce is on board, then, oh man, then there's Greg Hugland coming from Australia with never before seen stuff that he shot right out of Brooks Photography School in 1973 with Al Merrick in the Channel Island shop right there. Right. And then it kind of grew from that. And it's like, well, if you've talked to Bruce and you've talked to Greg, then Albie Falzon all of a sudden gives me a call and it's like, hey, you should take a look at this footage I've got from when I was shooting in 1972 with Crystal Voyager. And that kind of evolved into conversation with David Elphick. And so I'm trying to get to the point of it just started to blossom. But it was just getting people excited about it.
It's amazing. I love hearing that. Again, I was never not amazed by those things throughout the film because footage of that era, I feel like has been regurgitated over and over. And so I've seen the same few images over and over again. And from the beginning of the film, I'm seeing fresh stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, well, you're going to use all your A clips up front. But throughout the entire film, there's just more and more and more. It's like this, you unearthed a treasure trove. Just for listeners, so that they're aware, footage of Bob Simmons, Pat Curren at YMA in 1957. This is all footage of people surfing. Al Merrick, Bob Cooper, Greenough, McTavish, Tom Curren, Kim Merrick, Hackman. In terms of people interviewed, you got Bruce Brown, Yater, Sean Thompson, McTavish, Lovelace, Andrini, Pizell, Wayne Lynch, Nat Young, Tom Curren, Al Merrick, Kim Merrick. The list just goes on and on and on. In regard to footage collected, it's not just surf footage and B-roll footage. How did you license the Apocalypse Now footage? How did you get the footage of the Bank of America being set on fire during the riots in Santa Barbara?
I spent, for the Bank of America footage, I spent a solid couple of days at the archives at UCSB. And I just, called them and said, have you got anything, what are your papers, like your newspapers from this time? They had microfilm and they also had old scrapbooks and cuttings. And then I found some videos on the Creative Commons, and yeah, that stuff is all public access. That's that's Creative Commons stuff. And as far as how were we able to do the Apocalypse Now, I mean, John Milius was a huge fan of Yater. He wrote that line into the film that Coppola then made, and it made it all the way through. It's kind of one of those funny little folklore that we knew we had to include. So when we reached out, it took a long time. I mean, we kind of were thinking like, I don't know how this is going to work. And then we literally just called. Well, we figured out who owned the movie, and that was Coppola. And so that's his company's called American Zoetrope. So we just called them. And after a couple of months of back and forth and like explaining who we were and how we, had been doing this from a grassroots level and how we were just huge fans, and that our budget was, really, really minuscule. And by that time we had just gone through it all. They said, yeah, well, you're free to have it, as long as you can, talk to, as long as Robert Redford's okay with it, as long as Bob's okay with it. Sorry. as long as Duvall's okay with it.
Okay.
Yeah, because he's Kilgore. Robert Duvall is Kilgore. So as long as Mr. Duvall's all right, and it's like, all right, great, and so we're off to the races.
So they check with Duvall for you?
No, we had to go through his agent, and his agent's assistant was not very happy with us by the time we were done with this, because we were calling her probably at least once a week for about a month, and then once a month for a couple of months, and then it was like, all right, sweet, we're good.
Amazing. Yeah, and for listeners who don't remember the film, not only does Duvall say a line about getting his Yater spoon to go surfing, he's also wearing a Yater shirt prominently in the film. So who was responsible for interviewing all of those people?
Oh, that was me.
You did a phenomenal job.
Thank you very much. Dude,
honestly, everybody gave epic insights in the form of sound bites somehow. It was like things that I knew, like points that they would ultimately be trying to make, or they just delivered them in one sentence. I'm like, did you interview once, write everything down, and then ask them to state it in this concise fashion? It was amazing.
Oh, man,
over and over again.
That's huge praise coming from you as an interviewer. I mean, this was my first time, like I said, my first film. So I learned on the fly, that's for sure. But I can say that the only way I felt comfortable in those settings was preparation.
Yeah.
And I had my questions. I mean, I look back on, by the end of it, I got much more comfortable. But at the beginning, I had I had this binder, and then every question was on a single sheet. I made sure I didn't have to flip any pages, but the questions were all color coded by subject, and then I numbered them according to what number I thought would be good for the flow of conversation. And then, I wouldn't feel too bad about asking a question, re-asking it later. And yeah, as an interviewer, I definitely felt more comfortable as we went along. But I mean, that's just huge to hear, because I remember the first time when we actually got the fine cut together, and I was absolutely I was bowled over. I was stunned. I felt this incredible sense of like, all of a sudden this thing exists that's outside of me in this film, and the people are talking to me, and I couldn't really, it was hard for me to wrap my head around, because this thing was so obscure and amorphous for so long, and then all of a sudden it's like it starts coming together, and there's nothing better than that feeling for any filmmaker. But as my first film, and with all these people that I look up to and admire and legends, to see how they were willing to open up and share their experiences, and they're talking to me, it was just like it was definitely a special thing.
My experience with interviewing people has been that some people are very easy to interview because they just want to talk and they're great communicators. Other people, it's like pulling teeth. Tom Curren is notoriously a bad interview, and I've never interviewed him, but that's a well-known fact. Dude, the guy was putty in your hands. He opened up so much. How did it go? And was it difficult? Did you have to ease him into it?
Oh man, Tom was so awesome, and he was so kind to let us in also. And that was one of the last interviews we got. The film really hinges on it. And there was a version in my mind that's like, okay, we don't get Tom Curren. Like, what is that film going to look like? When it came out, like when we were able to go to his house, I could get into the stories, but maybe that'd be better for off mic. Because it was a process to get Tom. I mean, it took it over a year and a half, literally over a year and a half from the first time I met him and had told him about the film until he finally decided to sit down and have a conversation. And that's fine, but that's what it took. And, getting to the point where we were having the interview, I was definitely nervous, but that was, like I said, I felt pretty confident. And I actually really wanted to start that interview. I didn't want to start the interview the way we did. I actually wanted to start off talking about surfboards before we actually sat down, because I just kind of wanted to talk about something that was outside of, it's just, surfboards are what that was the whole thing. That was like the crux of our interview, is I wanted to talk to him about his boards and his designs and the things that he's been doing. And we ended up, because of our timing, switching it and doing a traditional interview style first. But yeah, it just worked out. I mean, I got to give all credit to my team. I was there with my producer, Justin Mish, who is exceptionally supportive and is always a calming presence. He was also operating a camera. And then Scott Sowens was working our A-cam. And Scott is a seasoned veteran. He was working on the first film that I worked on with Keith Malloy, and that's when I first met him. So I felt like I had people better than me around me, and that I knew that all together, like, we couldn't fail. And then from that point, it was like, just try and keep it casual. And I'm really happy that the interview turned out as well as it did.
Was Tom difficult to interview? Or to get to open up, I should say.
I don't know. I don't think that, it wasn't difficult, but even the word difficult, I wouldn't even want to use, because I try to think about this whole process was a matter of developing just a casual conversation, and I felt like, of course it's Tom Curren. Of course he's a legend. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty going into that. But once we're sitting there, it's just, someone who's interested in surfing and who can share some of their experience. And I'm just a fan. And so anything he had to say, I was happy to hear. And I just was really glad that, we were able to ask some of those tougher questions.
You nailed it. And I agree with you. I'm a huge fan, and I only want to hear more from Tom. I hang on every word, but I don't get to hear enough from him. That's the thing. And so this is like the most I've heard him talk in years. If I compiled all the information I heard from him in years, it's less than what you got out of him in this film. I'm curious just to get your personal thoughts on him riding the skimboard. Like, I've been watching that from the internet going, dude, you're just hindering all of your talent. I don't get it at all. What are your thoughts? Because there's footage of him in the film working on the skimboard, which is named Super Dave, by the way, and adding foam to it and shaping the foam off of it and adding fins and all that. But what are your thoughts on him riding it? Did you see him ride it?
Oh yeah, I saw him ride it. I saw him take that board from Brand Fresh Skim, and his whole process. He shaped half the thing in the middle of the night before his show in La Paloma and Encinitas. I mean, I think that what he's doing with skimboards is some of the most interesting innovation that's going on in surfing today, and I think it should not be undervalued, because it's really, really it's not. I think that those types of boards are going to be essentially what turn into our wave pool boards. Really hard rail boards that are flexible but short and maneuverable. I mean, they're super hard to make them work in the ocean, but the things that he's talking about with rail profiles and the shortening of the board in combination with the fin, like, no one's pushing that envelope like he is. And so the fact that he's doing it, I think, is extremely valuable. And it's going to be one of those things. I really feel like he's the incarnation of Greenough. At least in this film, what we're talking about is how can you manage flex and a shorter board? I mean, that's what Tom's talking about. And I think we'll look back on that time and go like, man, Tom has onto it like way before, because everyone's just going, oh, that's weird. That's wacko. That's crazy. But I think it takes people with that radical innovation, that idea for radical innovation, to make that happen. And I think that that as surfboards evolve and as wave pool surfing evolves, people who don't need so much volume but are looking for more performance boards are going to kind of go that direction, and they're going to look back on these early years and go, oh wow, how funny, they were riding ocean boards in the pool.
Yeah.
And that'll trickle over too. But I mean, I just think, and also the cool thing about watching Tom ride those boards is he's only doing it for himself. And what should anybody who surfs, like, if there's one message we're trying to convey in the film, is that you surf for yourself. You don't surf for other people, and you get it from what you want and how it makes you feel. and the people that you can build around you. And so the fact that he's still finding ways to make himself, have a good time and be excited by surfing, I think that should always be commended. And that that's what makes him Tom Curren, is that he's not trying to redo what he did before. He's not trying to hang on to something else. Like, he's completely pushing the envelope. And a little bit of a side note, I think it should be mentioned that if you look at the old boards that Tom was shaping, like, or at least the boards that he was riding, like Red Beauty and Black Beauty, they've got hard rails all the way to the nose. All the way to the nose. I mean, he talks about the reason why he likes a hard rail, because it's responsive, because it's more lively. It's not like he just came up with this idea. It's been throughout his whole career. And, people talk about that classic Tom Curren bottom turn where he just generates so much speed. I mean, there's got to be something to it with having, a hard rail like that you can just dig in as far as you want. So, yeah, with all that being said, I think that the work he's doing is super important, and people will look back on it as being really pivotal.
That was everything that you just said was another kind of congealing of data points for me, where I knew I studied Greenough enough to know what he was up to back in the day. I've seen Tom riding the skimboard, but seeing it all kind of in one film congealed it all and made it a linear narrative that illustrates what you said, is that Greenough experimenting on the fringe wasn't necessarily a board that would be applicable for everybody else to ride, but you can scale back from the edge and have something that actually is progressive. And that's what I feel like Tom is doing with the skimboard. And he almost even said it in the film. He goes, we're using the skimboard just to test almost the boundaries to then ride this. And he shows the stringerless EPS board. And like the sensations that we're creating in the skimboard, we're trying to translate over here. Mm-hmm. But if he doesn't ever go out and ride the skimboard, he doesn't know what those sensations are, So I thought that again, it was like, oh man, I had all these data points in my brain. I just didn't realize how to connect them all. So the film does a great job of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think it's funny that you in the history. I mean, it was. I think it was Keith who was telling me that. The best surfer in the world is an e-boarder. And that's the first time I heard about Greenough. And I couldn't really understand that. I couldn't really wrap my head around the idea. It's like, I didn't really know there was a difference between knee boarders and boogie boarders. And at the time, I had the prejudice against boogie boarders, which is completely unwarranted or unfounded. But, I was younger at that time. And that was like, how can that be? But yeah, it takes people can step outside of what's cool or what's the norm and think, I want to try this. I want to make something and then just go ahead and make it. And I mean, I interviewed a guy named Mike Davis, and he's in Australia, but he's a Santa Barbara guy. And he was saying that, before he moved to Australia, he kind of thought every town had its own George Greenough, because nobody in Santa Barbara was really paying much mind to George. He was doing his own thing. He was riding his own wave, and everyone's kind of like, okay, that's interesting. Like, he's, that's cool. But it really took George to go somewhere else and influence a new group of people for the ideas to take hold, because he just was, he was seen as the outsider. He was accepted, but his ideas were too radical for people to really translate in his own hometown.
Why wasn't Greenough interviewed in the film?
Greenough didn't want to be interviewed in the film. He, to his credit, thought that, the film should exist beyond him. And I got to meet him in 2017 and ask him a couple of questions and have a nice chat with him. But, I began to realize, like, it's good to preserve the myth. It's cool to talk about how he influenced so many people. But just frankly, he'd had experience with a film that he didn't like very much in the past. And so he kind of was turned off by the whole idea of being on film, which I can totally understand. And I respected from the very, earliest stages. I actually didn't really think we would ever get George. I would have taken it if he wanted to get on and talk, then absolutely. But, I thought that, there's enough story here beyond, his own experience, but the people that he touched that makes a film.
I mean, it would have been amazing. It would have been a boon for you to get him, but
well, he is in the film surfing.
Oh yeah, there's tons of Greenough footage. It's worth watching the film just to watch the Greenough footage, I would say. But yeah, it'd be great if you did get him. But at the same time, I don't know what the value for him would be. He's not promoting anything. He's living kind of a dream life, and there's no reason for him to engage with any of us or surf media in general.
It's nice. It's nicer to have. It's nice to kind of keep people. If people want to stay, quiet and in the shadows, like they absolutely deserve that. And but the work that he left is so valuable that can't help but tell a story that includes some aspect, But yeah, I told him about the film when we were making it. We got his blessings. We got footage. He allowed us to license some footage from him, and he was. He saw the film and he liked it. And last time we were in Australia, we got to go have another visit. With him, and it's funny. It's like we just picked up right where we left off 2 years ago. So
cool.
Yeah, and I mean those are the moments where it's like, man, that's the whole reason why we made this film.
That's awesome. What was the concept behind the music, and who did you employ? And I mean, it's seamless with the rest of the production and the aesthetic of the film.
Okay, so the music I'd love to talk about because it was done by my good friend Mike Coleman and his production studio in Tennessee, his music studio in Tennessee called Fortest Creative. We actually just dropped the whole album, the original soundtrack, on Spotify, so you can find it if you just search for the film. But yeah, Mikey is a friend of mine since middle school. And one of my best friends, and we grew up. He had a barn that we would take. We'd go up and everyone played music, and we'd hang out and drink beers when we were, we were just kids having a good time. And but he was always so talented. I knew when I was thinking about making this film for so long, I knew I wanted Mikey to make some music, and he brought together a really excellent group of musicians in Tennessee, and they started making music really early, really early. Like in 2017, when we were still doing the production on the film, he was having his team of like 4 or 5 musicians coming out, and they gave us. I mean, it was just an incredible thing for any filmmaker to have original music to cut to. And so as we were starting to develop how the pacing felt and what the story felt like, we had this music that was also evolving with us. And it was the first time they'd ever made music this way. These were all talented musicians, but they hadn't put out an album. They weren't necessarily in a touring band. These were kids that are looking to be professional working musicians, and were trying to gain experience just like we were as filmmakers. And but super talented, really dedicated. And we got to the point where after we had a fine cut, we just kept giving them all these insane, cool, groups that they could like use for inspiration. I mean, we pulled from Pink Floyd, we pulled from Black Sabbath. Obviously, Sabbath actually is in the film. We got some David Axelrod. We've got some samba, some Latin samba. We took. What else am I missing? We just had this incredibly eclectic. We got Bud Shank jazz, obviously, that turned into a hip hop groove. We had this incredible array of music, and these guys just had a field day with it. And one of the most gratifying times we made in the whole filmmaking process was going to Nashville for 7 days and scoring the film. And putting in, full days and nights of work of just writing music together, and watching these guys kind of grab on and take hold and, capture the feeling that we were trying to convey was just so special. So we did 22 original tracks for the film. And that was the guiding light. I mean, that's what made it so special. But there were a couple of songs that, I had in mind from the very beginning that I really wanted to see come through, and that was the song Bees by Caribou. That I just really loved that whole feeling of it. That turned out to be our final culmination, like explosion film, like surf segment. We also had Maryland by Mount Kimby, which when I heard the song originally, like wasn't very well known, and Mount Kimby was small. And then in the course of making the film, it got like massive. But that turned out to be the Tom Curren section, and that couldn't have come out better. And then Black Sabbath, which is the song with Sleeping Village or Warning. It's like a 10-minute long jam song from 1969. I found it. I never heard of that song before. And I was so fired up to like get a segment of it. And that was great because it ended up being like 2 or 3 music cues, like actual beat, like elements. But because it came from a 10-minute song, from a producing standpoint, it cost the same. And that was a great one because I like to think, Sharon Osbourne signed off on it, right? She gave us the rights to use it. And once, I just like to think that she's like, oh, they picked this song because it's not like it's not Paranoid, it's not Iron Man, and it was really easy to get that signed. So that was kind of like the first step to getting the other two. And we of course had to pay them, but
yeah, of course. The graphics as well. Who is responsible for the concept of the graphics and the execution, both of which were phenomenal. Like, conceptually, it tied together elements really beautifully, but the aesthetic of the graphics too, it was genius.
The graphics were something that was like a pipe dream for me because I don't know how to do graphics, and our budget was so slim that I just didn't think we'd ever be able to do it right. I was always trying to do it filmically, and basically what we're talking about is discussing what the Yater spoon is, or what the Greenough spoon is. And I kept showing the film because the film was meant to be accessible to non-surfers. And we kept showing it, and people would be like, okay, it's great, I get it, but like I want to see some like schematics, like I want to see some graphics. So super fortunate again to find a young, talented graphic designer and artist named Mau Dominguez. And he's a surfer in Encinitas, and he's a friend of our editor, Dana. He was willing to basically do whatever it took to get these things done. And he made it come through, and it just gives the film a polish and makes you feel like you're being taken care of. So, yeah, we're really happy with how those came out for sure.
I am too. And again, it was informative.
Actually, okay, so I was just mentioning the graphics, but I wanted to also mention that our graphic designer was DJ Javier in Santa Barbara. And DJ has started to get a bit of a cult following, especially, I'd call it an underground following, but he's kind of coming above ground, like he's blowing up. And he's the one who did our logo. He helped us with the text treatments, and he kind of helped with our original like one sheet that we still use. And so DJ is one of those great stories where he just reached out to me on Instagram and said, hey, do you guys need any graphic design work? And it couldn't have been better. I mean, he's a local Santa Barbara guy. He was looking to make the transition from working with a corporate office to freelancing, and was exploring art in a different way. And we had a good conversation over coffee. I told him I had a couple $100 that I basically got from, Christmas money. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. So like basically for like less than the price of a surfboard, he did the graphics for us. And now it's just been amazing to watch him. We're so thankful. It's been super stoked on that work.
So that brings us to budget. You've repeatedly said, we're working on a shoestring budget, but at the same time, you are licensing Black Sabbath music. Can you give me any ballpark for what it costs to make something like this? Because also, you spend 8 years. There's almost no way to justify 8 years worth of time on a project unless you're making a significant return on that. What does a budget look like for something like this?
Oh, it's archival documentary films are notoriously the most expensive, and I didn't really know that setting out on this. We spent, not really including our own time, because we haven't paid ourselves anything on this project. We spent, a lot more money than I'd really care to discuss. But let's just say that we raised $50,000 on Kickstarter, 47,200 on Kickstarter, and that was due to the community support that we were able to generate, which we're super grateful for, because that's what allowed us to license the visuals, both the photos and the video, and then we put our own money into it. I gotta take a pause and just mention that the project really needed it really needed a direction, and it needed a helping hand stepping up in like 2017 to 2018. And that's when my producer Justin Mish came on board, and Justin brought an ability to make sure that we weren't compromising, because I got to the point many times where we were so broke and overextended that I was willing to do anything, which basically means sell the film out before it's even finished. And he just said, let's not do that. Let's make sure we own it. Let's make sure we don't, do anything crazy. Like, we want to get this thing done and eventually sellable. So we did the Kickstarter. We were able to get a private investor who came on for, not an insignificant sum, but a definite chunk of the film. We put our own money into it. And then we had a hole at the end of it. And what we did was we put it on credit cards. So we maxed out 2 credit cards, maxed them out entirely. And then we were to get a personal loan. And essentially it was an investment, right? This was something that we as filmmakers knew we wanted to do, and felt that it wouldn't be done unless we were going to continue to charge forward on it. So, yeah.
One decision that I'd be curious to hear your philosophy behind is, it seems like you've been really private about, like, I'm talking about all of this surf footage that I've never seen before that's in the film. But it seems like you've been pretty private about sharing that footage on social media. And there certainly is a trailer that exists and a couple of clips that are out there, but that's 3% of the footage that's in the film. You could certainly increase film sales if you put footage out there for free, which is kind of paradoxical. But what is your philosophy and strategy with not teasing out these clips?
Well, I think that it's important that we recognize that this film isn't just the best surfing of 2019 or 2020. Like, this is it's a historical document, and so we felt it's going to retain its value, and we don't want to blow it all out too early. We're teasing it out, and basically we have a long-term strategy with how we're going to engage our viewership, and it involves showing never before seen archive, but it also involves the story of how we got the footage and how we remastered it, how we accumulated it, and essentially the film itself becoming a vehicle for this whole process, everything we've been talking about. So with that being said, we should be posting more. We should. Our whole goal is to show it more. Is to eventually do a book, and to make sure that people have access to that stuff. But it was hard because at the very get-go, we get a great piece of archive, and it'd be like, "Oh, awesome! Let's put it online and show everybody." But we want to make sure that people have something to watch when they go to the film, because it's such a bummer when you do plunk down and you say, "Hey, I'm going to watch this film," and then all of a sudden you realize I've already seen it all. That's my least favorite thing about trailers nowadays.
But I think one smart move on your part is just taking frame grabs of the footage. So it is a tease. It's like, oh, there is footage of whoever it is. So I'll just watch the film to actually see it.
Yeah, I think I love those frame grabs too, because you can really hone in on the detail. A big thing that we did with this film, what was very difficult, was we remastered a whole heck of a lot of it. You know, as we were pulling this footage from Super 8, like or 16, or we were basically trying to find the best visual quality we could, and a lot of times the last time any of the stuff was digitized was like in 2005 or 2000. And the technology has come so far since then. We wanted to show these films in high definition, in 2K and in 4K, and that kind of guided the whole spirit of what we were doing, so that you do get to the point where you look at, I posted recently, you see Nat Young on a wave at in Crystal Voyager, and you get to, when you get to the best version of that, you can see, oh, Nat's got a mustache and he's got a ding repair on his board. And you can see the way that people are moving their feet on their board differently, and say, oh, here's Sean Thompson in Freeride. He's wearing a watch, and you just feel more in it, and that's what makes it such a fun experience. But it's the remastering.
Just side note, what is the process of remastering? I mean, I understand the concept of it, but what's the actual process?
So it's a very in-depth process that we had no idea about before we started. But then by the time we were done, we ended up with a full new company. The company is called Origins Archival. But the process is essentially gathering the best version of the film that you can. So that's, if in the best case scenario, is getting the camera negatives, the film that was actually shot that day. That's like what Bruce Brown handed us with the San Miguel roll that opens the film up. Those are the best possible negatives to get. But from there, you can get your inner negative, which is a film term for saying the piece that gets you to the part where you can edit. Or you can go from a work print, which is essentially the early version of an editor. They had the film, they would cut it all up from the work print, which is like a copy. And in some cases, we were taking it from release prints, which are the actual reels of film that were shown throughout, a whole tour or whatever, and had been seen tens of times, maybe on a film tour or something like that. That was in the case of Freeride by Bill Delaney. We would get the best possible original version that we could get, and then we would scan it to the highest resolution that we could, which is a 4K scan. That's what we can do. And that was something that when we were starting the process, we were frustrated by, because everybody kept telling us, oh, that's Super 8, or oh, that's 16. You don't really need to have that in anything higher than 1080. You can't tell. And we're like, wait, 1080? Like that's old. Why not at least 2K? Like, why is it so expensive to get to 4K? Anyway, the process is get the best original, scan it to the highest quality that you can, clean it, and then in some cases do some digital remastering, which includes stabilization, flicker reduction, scratch removal, those kinds of things, and then put it into the film, and hopefully it shines like a jewel.
The cleaning of it and flicker reduction and all that is done on digital software?
Some of it is. Cleaning it is actually a physical process. I mean, we take these films, imagine some of this stuff has been sitting in an attic and in Gary for, 30, 40 years. Some stuff has been, collecting dust under someone's bed and they haven't looked at it. So it's got mold. It's, starting to fade because it's been kept in temperature that's too warm, or the film itself actually has a physical lifespan. And that was another element to it, was that, shot in 1960, the physical lifespan of film under the best conditions is 80 years. So we're coming up on the end of that. Especially depending on how it's stored, and knowing surfers, a lot of this stuff was kind of just, put wherever they could find space for it. That was, you actually have to clean it with alcohol or acetone or certain cleaners, and wipe off the mold when you could. And then, yes, when you get as good a condition as you can, then scan it and run the softwares that we have access to. Yeah.
Got it. In terms of distribution, where would you ultimately like to see this film live?
Well, the distribution of it, is it's another part of independent filmmaking that we didn't realize necessarily going into it, but coming out of it, realizing self-distribution is crucial. Owning your own content nowadays is kind of the name of the game. But it's an interesting time because the landscape is shifting so much. Eventually, we'd love to see the film on, the widest release possible online. I mean, as I basically feel that anybody, if anyone could watch the film, then we've done our job, and now anyone can watch it, on iTunes, Google, YouTube, or Vimeo. Sorry, I got to plug it. But yeah, Netflix would be great. Amazon Prime would be great. And we've been reaching out to some of these folks, but maybe even Red Bull TV. Who knows? But we're happy that right now people have access to it and can see it if they want to.
Do you think you'll ever see a return on the investment?
Well, we're pretty close to breaking even.
Good.
So it's been a year. Well, we premiered it in February 2019, and we've been online since February 2020, and we've been selling DVDs. We have them for sale on our website, and those have been doing pretty good. Actually, we had a great relationship with Maneuverline in Japan. They picked up 1,500 DVDs from us, so that made a huge dent in our debts. And essentially, yeah, I mean, like I said, this film is not the best surfing of 2019 or 2020. Like this is a designed to be a document that you could revisit. And you spoke earlier about the text, like the actual magazines or the sheer amount of footage. It's kind of, for us, like, it's just nice to know that it's there. But for any crazy super fan, we wanted it to be to where they could pause any single frame and study it. And I really feel like that's what we've done, is make something that you can revisit. So I think that these ideas are important. They're crucial to our surfing heritage, and they should be revisited. And therefore, I think that we'll have a very long life. And yeah, I think we will see a return.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, because I mean, that was kind of my original question about budget, was more to get to that, which is we want more films. We want better quality films. And if there isn't a sustainable model at this point, obviously there is for independent film. Obviously there is for documentary. We're kind of having a heyday of documentary, but this little niche that you're in where it's surf documentary. So the surf audience loves it, but is that enough people to actually make it profitable? Or is the filmmaker kind of talented enough to make it applicable to a broader market that will then help you reach, solvency, financial solvency?
Well, I think we'll have to see. I mean, people who don't surf, if they like the film, then that answers that, because we want people who don't have to be surfers to like it, and so far that's been the response. But yeah, I think really, if there's anything that we learned in this process was the value of looking at archives. And there are so many archives out there. There's so many classic surf films out there, and there are so many outtakes from those surf films that have never been seen before, that I hope that people see the value in that and look to have them scanned. And that was part of the process when with like this film scanning enterprise that we've come up with, is like how we can make a way for other filmmakers to now find their own stories that way. And
is there a potential for a series of films about board designs and or little surf communities?
I absolutely think so. I think that this is really a film about mentorship and craftsmanship and place. And those, that trifecta exists in every surfing community,
You said you want to encourage other filmmakers to do it. Are you exhausted at this point? Do you have any ambition to do it again?
Oh man. I mean, Spoons was the first film I made, and the first time I could ever make a film this way, and the only time I could ever make a film this way. I knew while we were making it, this was the only shot we had, because a lot of the people we were working with are so talented. They're young in their careers. They just want to work on a feature film or something that they were stoked about. But, throughout the process of the multi-year thing, like, they became too expensive, so it really requires, people who are hungry and who can scrape together whatever they can to make something. I absolutely intend to keep making surf films, but I want to continue to learn as I go through the process. Archival surf filmmaking is one thing. I want to try other formats. I'd like to try to do some large format stuff. But then, I think the other thing about it is it really is just a story, right? It's just a Santa Barbara story. I'd like to see other stories too. I personally, as a filmmaker, want to try to, do things outside of surfing. I'd like to try narrative stuff outside the documentary space. But there's a long track ahead. So I think as long as we just kind of keep building on what we've done and share with other people, whatever insights we can, and try to give back wherever we can, it'll be good.
Is there something that you're currently working on or in pre-production on? Can you talk about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Most connected with the Spoons project with Spoons is Morning of the Earth, which is a classic surf film from 1972, directed by Albie Falzon. That film we are remastering from the ground up, soup to nuts, into 4K. And that project we've been working on for the past almost 2 years now. That's a project that Justin Mish, this producer of Spoons, is spearheading. And the film looks absolutely stunning. It's going to be shown in a way that people haven't seen since the original movie houses, because it was never available for video consumption until it came out on DVD in the 2000s. And in that version, they cut a few things, and the aspect ratios are different, the colors are different. So we went back to the original A and B negatives, like I said, the best negatives that we could get, and then we're going to the original soundtrack, and having that remastered with the original musicians, and then we're gonna do a similar thing that we're doing with Spoons, which is generate this community around it with a book, with a tour. The film Morning of the Earth, it's been called The Australian Endless Summer, but it's so much different than that. The film is really noteworthy because it's kind of the first example of a film in the modern surf film structure, meaning that there's no narration. It's just music and surfing. But the message in it is very, very clear, which is this message of going back to the earth, of community, of the beauty of the natural world. And that's a message that we need to revisit now more than ever. So I'm super excited about it. I'm super excited for the work that Justin's been doing on it. And in that remastering project, we're also making a documentary, a shorter film, not a 60-minute piece or anything like that, but a documentary about the film to give new viewers an understanding about it, give it some context, because that's necessary. It's not just for the people who remember it from their youth. It's also for young people to look at and go, oh, I see why this is such an important film and why we should celebrate it.
Do you have an expected timeline for that release?
Yeah, we're looking to have it done by late 2020.
Oh, wow. Okay, awesome. You're talking about investing so much in the remastering process. Is someone's laptop computer or their phone the right place to view all of that hard work?
Oh, anybody who wants to see it anywhere, we'd be happy to have them see it. But I'd say along with the music, the best way to watch it is in a theater. If you can have that experience, that's really what it's all about. In combination with like going with your buddies and having, a couple of beers or whatever, making some noise. If you can see in a theater or in your home theater, you're experiencing it. But hey, if you like watching things on your phone, then why not? Go for it.
This would be a good time to shout out the Florida Surf Film Festival, who
I love those guys.
Yeah, not only hosted you guys, but you guys won the award that evening, and that's where I connected with you guys too. So shout out to those guys. It was a good event.
Yeah, they put on an amazing celebration of surf culture that we were so proud to be a part of. And man, that was a wonderful time. I can't wait to go back, and whatever respect we can get back there. That was just the best.
Yeah, they really are the best. Obviously, I will direct people to your website and all of that stuff in post production. But is there anything else that you want to say? Is there anywhere that you would like to direct people to? Is there a best place for them to purchase the film?
iTunes, Vimeo, Google Play, or YouTube. Any of those. That'll work great. We actually just dropped it online for rental. And if people would like to have a hard copy, we have a DVD that's beautiful. It's got some great information in it. Available on our website at spoonsfilm.com. The DVDs are great. And if you check out the Instagram too, at spoons_film, it's all there. And, you know, we manage this whole thing. So if you guys want to reach out, it's easy to find us at those channels too.
Awesome. And let's follow through and set up a podcast interview with Rennie at some point soon.
Oh God, that'd be the best. I mean, it might be tough to get him to say too much, but once you get him going, like he's got some great stories and that'd be wonderful.
I would really love to make that happen. I'll do the drive up there to do it.
Okay.
I think I could soften him up.
I should be getting a board from him pretty soon. I got another spoon on the way. I've been waiting until we got to the point where we were at least, I got a spoon coming. And so I'll talk to him about that. And hopefully, that'd be cool.
And even just send him this one maybe once we publish it.
Oh, yeah, it'd be great. And, it'd be classic to get Mark and Drini to go with Rennie because they shaped in the same area together. And Mark was kind of, he learned a lot from Rennie early on.
Is Rennie living that far north? He's not in Santa Barbara anymore?
Well, no, Mark and Drini grew up in Santa Barbara.
Right.
So, Rennie's still in Santa Barbara. Mark is always in Santa Barbara.
Okay.
He's always delivering boards, and he's always, having lunch with the boys.
Got it. Awesome. Well, again, congratulations, you guys, on such a successful film. And it's a gift. I'm a huge fan. I'm thrilled to have it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. And also wanted to do one last shout out and say thank you to everyone who made this film possible. I mean, it's been the trip of a lifetime, and it wouldn't be possible without the incredible community support that we had, without the individual support of our associate producers, guys like Roger Nance and Kim Robinson, and the archive providers that were so kind with their footage, and it's just been the honor of a lifetime, and so proud of the project and happy that you enjoy it. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, you guys honored the all that archival footage in a really good way and professional way and sentimental too. So good job.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, you're welcome. It goes without saying that I absolutely loved this film, and I appreciate its contribution to the canon of surf film and other historical documents that provide backstory and context for our own surf experience. You can find it wherever you rent films for streaming, but I've also posted links to it on surfsplendorpodcast.com. Of course, every past episode of Surf Splendor, as well as Spit and The Grit and Scott Bass's The Boardroom Show and Donald Brink's Swell With My Soul, all of the past episodes of everything is available on surfsplendorpodcast.com for free, with visuals that accompany every episode. And of course, there's a comment section at the bottom of each page as well, so you can leave a comment for Wyatt or anybody that's ever been featured, and I always make sure to forward those things along. So thanks a lot for that. You can also find, follow, and share our show on Instagram. That is a great way to connect. I try to maintain daily communication there. Growth of this show is important. It ensures that we're able to attract great guests. So if you could just share this show with one friend, that would ensure that we have double the listenership next week. So that would be huge. And Instagram is, of course, a really simple and great way to do that. Just DM the advertisement for this podcast over to them. And again, I will be posting visuals of this film on Instagram for the next few days, the next week, to promote this episode. So check all of that out. This week is Independence Day for the United States of America, 4th of July. So Chaz and I will both be out of town at the end of the week. So we're going to miss recording an episode of The Grit, but we will reconvene next Friday. But I'll be back on Spit on Tuesday first of all with Scott, and then back here for Surf Splendor on Wednesday with an all-new episode. So enjoy the holiday weekend. I will see you on Instagram in the meantime. And that's all I've got for this week. So this is, of course, David Scales for Surf Splendor, reminding you to get back into the ocean, share some waves, and shred on.